Commander Park Yuna felt her stomach drop as she looked at the screens in front of her. The UES Relentless was floating in empty space, and something was very wrong. Outpost Theta 7 should have been talking to them every hour, but there had been nothing but silence for 12 long hours. The last message they got was terrible, just screaming and strange noises that made everyone on the ship feel sick. Yuna had heard many bad things in her 20 years as a space commander, but this was different. This made her hands shake. Captain Lee Minho, she called to her second, in command. Get the boarding team ready. We need to see what happened over there. Minho nodded and ran to prepare the soldiers. He was a good man who had served with Yuna for 5 years. They had been through dangerous missions before, but both of them knew this felt wrong. As their ship got closer to the outpost, Yuna could see the damage through the windows. The space station looked like someone had beaten it with a giant hammer. Big holes were burned into the metal walls. Strange marks covered the outside that looked like nothing she had ever seen before. "Commander," said Kim Deho from his communication station. His voice was shaking and his face was pale. "I'm getting messages from all over this part of space. The Zephyrians are calling for help. So are the Altarians. Even the quiet void dwellers are sending emergency signals." Yuna walked over to look at his screen. Red warning lights were flashing everywhere. Dozens of alien species were all reporting the same thing. Their outer colonies were being attacked by something unknown. When the boarding team entered Outpost Theta 7, what they found made even the toughest soldiers feel sick. Bodies were floating in the halls, but they weren't just dead. They were torn apart in ways that showed intelligence. Whatever killed these people knew exactly how to hurt them the most. Captain Lee Minho's voice came through the radio, quiet and serious. "Commander, you need to see this. There are strange crystal pieces stuck in the walls. They're still glowing." Yuna put on her spacesuit and floated over to the outpost herself. The crystals were beautiful but frightening. They pulsed with purple, light, and felt warm even through her gloves. When she touched one, images flashed in her mind. Pictures of huge ships that looked like living creatures. Creatures with too many teeth and eyes that burned like stars. "These aren't from any species we know," she said into her radio. "Someone completely new did this." Back on the Relentless, the crew worked to understand what they had found. The ship's computer tried to match the crystal fragments with known materials but found nothing. The energy signatures were unlike anything in their databases. Even the way the victims were killed was strange. Too precise to be random violence, too cruel to be just business. Communications Officer Kim Deho kept getting more bad news. "Commander, I'm counting 47 different distress calls now. They're coming from 3 different spiral arms of the galaxy. Whatever this is, it's big." Yuna stood in her command room, looking out at the stars. Humanity had only joined the galactic community 50 years ago. Most alien species still didn't trust humans because Earth had such a violent history. Humans were known for being aggressive and dangerous, which made other species nervous about sharing information with them. But now something was attacking everyone. The Zephyrians with their crystal cities, the Altarians with their peaceful gardens, even the mysterious void dwellers who lived in empty space between stars. Whatever was out there didn't care what species you were, it just wanted to destroy. "Send a message to Admiral Kang on Earth," Yuna ordered. "Tell him we're not dealing with pirates or rebels anymore. This is something completely different, something that wants to hurt everyone." As she watched Kim Deho send the message, Yuna felt a cold fear in her chest. In all her years of space travel, she had never seen anything like this. The crystals, the precise killings, the way the attacks happened everywhere at once. It all pointed to an enemy that was smarter and more organized than anything the galaxy had faced before. The stars that had always seemed peaceful and beautiful now felt threatening. Somewhere out there in the darkness, something was coming for all of them. And Yuna had the terrible feeling that humanity's reputation for violence might be the only thing that could save the galaxy from whatever was hunting them all. The massive war room on Titan Station was like a zoo of angry aliens. 12 different species were all talking at once, their voices mixing together in a horrible symphony of panic and fear. Some spoke in high whistles, others in deep growls that made the metal floors vibrate. The air was thick with the smell, of different alien-breathing gases and the sharp scent of fear. Admiral Kang Ji-won stood in the middle of it all like a rock in a storm. His gray hair was perfectly combed and his face showed no emotion even though chaos surrounded him. He had seen wars before, but nothing like this. The aliens were terrified and their terror was making them stupid. The Altarian delegate was a tall, thin creature that looked like a walking stick insect. Its forearms waved wildly as it spoke through a small metal box that translated its clicks and hisses into human words. "The Devourers eat everything," it said, its voice coming out sharp and angry. "They don't just kill our people, they turn our entire planets into food for their machines. They consume the metal, the rock, even the atmosphere. Nothing is left behind." A Zephyrian representative floated near the ceiling, its crystalline body catching the light and throwing rainbow patterns on the walls. These creatures were made of living crystal and thought they were better than everyone else because they never fought wars. "We must follow proper procedures," it sang in its bell-like voice. "There are evacuation protocols to follow, diplomatic channels to explore. We cannot simply panic and start shooting." Admiral Kang had heard enough. His voice cut through all the alien chatter like a knife through paper. "There is no time for your procedures," he said, each word clear and hard. "Captain Choi Hyun-woo just came back from a scouting mission. The enemy is heading straight for the Centauri Gate." The room went completely silent. Every alien eye, whether it was big and round or small and sharp, turned to look at the human admiral. The Centauri Gate was the most important hyperspace junction in this part of the galaxy. Ships from hundreds of worlds passed through it every day. If the Devourers took control of it, they could attack anywhere they wanted. "If that junction falls," Kang continued, his voice steady and calm, "half the galaxy becomes impossible to defend. They'll be able to hit any world, any station, any fleet. We'll be fighting on 1,000 fronts at once." The alien delegates erupted in protests. Some screamed, some whistled, some made sounds like breaking glass. They wanted more time to think, more time to plan, more time to follow their careful rules about how civilized species should behave in war. But Admiral Kang was already walking toward the door. He had made his decision hours ago when the first reports came in. Humanity's third fleet was waiting in the outer system, hidden behind a small moon where enemy sensors couldn't detect them. While the aliens argued about protocols, humans were getting ready to fight. Captain Choi Hyun-woo had risked his life to get close to the enemy fleet. What he saw made even a tough space captain feel sick. The Devourer ships weren't built, they were grown. They looked like huge insects or deep-sea creatures made of metal and flesh. Some were the size of city blocks, covered in spikes and tentacles that moved on their own. Others were smaller, but moved so fast they looked like deadly blurs. When the Devourers came out of hyperspace near the Centauri Gate, space itself seemed to tear open. Reality bent and twisted as their living ships emerged from the dark space between dimensions. They moved in perfect formation, like a swarm of deadly insects hunting for prey. But they weren't alone. Humanity's third fleet was waiting for them. Lieutenant Commander Song Minji stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching her fighter pilots launch into space. She was young for a commander, only 32, but she had earned her position in battles against space pirates and rebel colonies. Her pilots trusted her because she never asked them to do anything she wouldn't do herself. "All fighters, this is base command," she spoke into her headset. "Remember your training. These things are tough, but they can be killed. Aim for the glowing spots. That's where their power sources are." The human fighters screamed through space like angry wasps. They were smaller than the Devourer ships, but they were fast and their pilots were fearless. The enemy fought like perfect machines, never making mistakes, never showing fear. Their weapons were incredibly accurate, and their ships could take massive damage and keep fighting. But humans fought differently. They fought like people who had nothing left to lose, like cornered animals that would bite and claw until their last breath. When their ships were damaged, they didn't retreat. They rammed into enemy vessels. When their weapons ran out of ammunition, they got creative and used whatever they could find. Song Minji watched as Lieutenant Park Jin-soo's fighter got hit by enemy fire. His engine was smoking and his weapons were dead, but instead of ejecting, He aimed his crippled ship at a Devourer cruiser and hit the afterburners. The explosion lit up space like a small star. The battle raged for 6 hours. The Devourers were stronger and had better technology, but they couldn't understand why these small human ships kept attacking even when victory seemed impossible. They were used to fighting civilized species that retreated when the odds were bad. When the smoke cleared, the Centauri Gate was still in human hands. The Devourer fleet was retreating, but they had learned something important about their new enemies. Humans didn't fight like the other species in the galaxy. They fought like they wanted to win more than they wanted to live. The inside of the Devourer mothership was like walking through the belly of a sick giant. Captain Yoon Seung-min tried not to breathe too deeply as he led his Marines through corridors that dripped with green, burning liquid. The walls weren't made of metal like human ships. They were alive, pulsing like a heartbeat and covered in veins that glowed with sickly light. "Stay close and watch your step," Seung-min whispered into his helmet radio. "This stuff will eat through your boots in 30 seconds. Behind him, 12 of the toughest Marines in the human fleet followed, in single file. They had volunteered for this mission knowing they probably wouldn't come back. That's what made them different from the other species in the galaxy. Humans were willing to die for people they'd never met. The artificial gravity kept changing, making them feel heavy one moment and weightless the next. Sometimes they had to crawl on the ceiling when the gravity flipped completely upside down. The ship was trying to confuse them, but Marines were trained for strange environments. Sergeant Bae Soon-ho was carrying the antimatter charges in a special case that was heavier than a small car. He was sweating inside his armor, but he never complained. He had grown up on a farming colony that got attacked by pirates when he was 12. His whole family died that day, and he joined the Marines to make sure it never happened to other kids. "How much further to the power core?" asked Private Lee Hyeji, the youngest member of the squad. She was only 19 and had been in space for less than a year, but she was tough as old leather. "2 more levels down," Seung-min answered, checking his scanner. "The ship's getting more aggressive the deeper we go. It knows we're here." The walls were starting to grow spikes that tried to stab them as they walked past. Strange sounds echoed through the corridors, sounds like crying children or screaming animals. The ship was trying to scare them, but humans had heard worse sounds in their own wars on Earth. A Zephyrian observer floated along with them, its crystal body glowing nervously. The aliens had insisted on sending someone to watch the mission, but now their representative looked sick. These crystal beings had never seen anything like human determination up close. "Your species is insane," the Zephyrian whispered through its translator. "You walk towards certain death as if it means nothing." Seung-min smiled grimly behind his helmet. "Death means everything. That's why we're not afraid of it." They reached the power core after fighting through 3 groups of Devourer defenders. The enemy creatures looked like giant spiders made of metal and rotting flesh. They fought well, but they couldn't understand why the humans kept advancing even when they were badly hurt. The power core was a massive sphere that hung in the center of a huge chamber. It pulsed with energy that made their teeth ache and their skin tingle. Strange symbols covered its surface, writing in a language that looked almost familiar but not quite right. "This is it," Sergeant Bae said, opening the case with the antimatter charges. "Once I arm these, we have exactly 3 minutes to get to minimum safe distance." Everyone knew they couldn't reach minimum safe distance in 3 minutes. The nearest exit was at least 10 minutes away, and that was if they ran the whole time without fighting any more defenders. "Charges are set," Bae reported, his voice calm despite the static that filled their radios. The ship was interfering with their communications, but his message came through clearly. "But we're not making it out of here, sir." Seung-min nodded and looked at each of his Marines. They were all young people with families back home, dreams they'd never fulfill, lives they'd never finish living. But not one of them looked scared. They looked proud. The Zephyrian observer was staring at them with what might have been horror or amazement. Its crystal body had turned completely white, which meant it was terrified. "You accept death so easily," it said in a voice like breaking glass. "How can you be so calm?" "Because someone has to," Seung-min answered simply. If we don't stop this ship, it will destroy a whole solar system. 20 billion people live in that system. Our lives for 20 billion lives. That's good math. The countdown timer showed 2 minutes and 30 seconds. The power core was starting to vibrate, sensing the antimatter charges that would soon tear it apart. The walls around them began to close in, but it was too late for the ship to save itself. Back on the command ship, Admiral Kang Ji-won watched the tactical display with no expression on his weathered face. A small dot representing Seungmin's team blinked red, then disappeared forever. The antimatter explosion lit up half the solar system like a new sun being born and dying in the same moment. The Devourer mothership, bigger than most cities, simply vanished. With it went Captain Yoon Seungmin, Sergeant Bai Sunho, Private Lee Heji, and 9 other brave Marines who chose to die so that strangers could live. Colonel Park Ju-hyun, Admiral Kang's aide, noticed that the old man's hands were shaking slightly as he read the casualty report. Kang had sent thousands of people to their deaths over the years, but it never got easier. "Sir," Ju-hyun said quietly, "the intelligence team finished analyzing those intercepted transmissions from the Devourers. You need to hear this." He handed Kang a data pad with the translation. As the Admiral read, his face grew harder and his eyes colder. The truth was worse than anyone had imagined. The Devourers aren't invaders from outside our galaxy, Ju-hyun explained. They're what all the current galactic species used to be millions of years ago, before they evolved past their aggressive instincts. They're our ancestors, the violent, warlike versions of every civilized race in the galaxy. Admiral Kang closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them with steel in his gaze. "So they evolved past their violence and became civilized," he said slowly, "and we're showing them exactly what they gave up when they chose peace over strength." The irony was terrible and perfect. The galaxy's civilized species had become peaceful and gentle over millions of years of evolution. But humans were still young and savage, still carrying the fire that had once burned in every species. Now that fire was the only thing standing between civilization and the hungry darkness that wanted to devour everything. The emergency meeting room in the Galactic Council building felt like a courtroom where humanity was on trial. Admiral Kang Ji-won stood in the center of the circular chamber, surrounded by representatives from every major species in the galaxy. His black uniform was torn in 3 places from the last battle, and a fresh bandage covered a cut on his left cheek. He looked tired, but his eyes burned with determination. The holographic displays behind him showed images that made several alien delegates look away in horror. Entire planets were being evacuated, their populations fleeing in massive transport ships. But worse than that were the images of worlds rigged with explosives, turned into giant bombs waiting for the Devourers to arrive. "You're asking us to become monsters," said the Altarian Chancellor, its insect-like voice trembling with disgust. The tall, thin creature's forearms were wrapped around itself as if it was trying to hold itself together. "These tactics, they're beneath civilized beings." Admiral Kang didn't flinch. His voice was cold as space when he answered. "I'm asking you to survive. Major Han Soo-young has run the numbers 1,000 times. Conventional tactics won't work against the Devourers. They're too strong, too fast, and they heal too quickly. We have to make every step they take forward cost them more than they can afford." Major Han Soo-young stood near the back of the room, a small woman with sharp eyes and graying hair. She had been humanity's best military analyst for 20 years, and her computers could calculate battle outcomes better than most species could think. Her reports were always accurate, and they were always terrifying. "Show them the projections," Kang ordered. The holographic displays changed to show battle simulations. In every scenario where the Allied forces fought traditionally, they lost. The Devourers were simply too powerful. But when the humans used their brutal tactics, turning planets into weapons, sacrificing entire star systems to create traps, the enemy advance slowed to a crawl. General Lim Tae-hyun stepped forward to explain the strategy. He was a big man, with scars on his hands from his early days as a ground soldier. "The planet-killer missiles will destroy the Kirin system completely," he said, pointing to a star map. "Yes, we'll lose 12 billion people if we can't evacuate them in time, but the debris field will be so thick that the Devourers won't be able to pass through it for months. That forces them to go around, straight into the Hadron Nebula, where our fleets can ambush them. The alien delegates reacted like he had suggested eating their children. The Zephyrian representative, a living crystal creature that floated 3 feet off the ground, began to glow with angry light. "Enough!" it shouted, its bell-like voice cracking with outrage. "You speak of destroying entire solar systems as if it were a simple math problem. You talk about genocide like it's routine strategy." Admiral Kang's smile was thin and sharp as a knife blade. "Because for us, it is routine strategy. You came to us for help because your peaceful methods weren't working. This is what human help looks like. We don't fight pretty wars." The room erupted in angry voices. The Void Dwellers made sounds like screaming wind. The Aquatic Federation's representative splashed angrily in its water tank. The Botanical Collective's plant-like delegates rustled their leaves in distress. They were all horrified by humanity's willingness to sacrifice everything to win. "You don't understand," said the Altarian Chancellor, its voice pleading. "We evolved past this kind of thinking millions of years ago. We learned that there are some prices too high to pay even for victory. And that's exactly why you're losing," General Lim replied bluntly. "The Devourers kept all the instincts you threw away. They still remember how to be ruthless. We never forgot." Commander Park Yuna, who had discovered the first Devourer attack, spoke from her seat near the wall. "I've seen what they do to captured populations. They don't just kill, they harvest. They turn living beings into fuel for their war machine. Every day we spend being civilized is another day they get stronger." The debate went on for hours. Several species threatened to leave the Alliance rather than be part of humanity's brutal campaign. The Peaceful Union said they would rather surrender than become monsters. The Harmony Collective claimed that victory achieved through such methods wasn't worth having, but Admiral Kang had heard enough. "You have a choice," he said, his voice cutting through all the arguing. "You can fight this, or our way with our methods and maybe survive. Or you can fight it your way with your rules and your procedures and definitely die. But don't pretend there's a third option where everyone lives happily ever after." Major Han Soo-young activated her computer and showed new calculations. "The Devourers are learning from each battle. They're adapting faster than we expected. If we don't act decisively in the next 72 hours, they'll overrun the core systems before we can mount any defense at all." The alien delegates looked at the numbers and felt their hope dying. The humans were right. There was no gentle way to win this war. But accepting human help meant accepting human methods, and human methods were terrifying. That's when the alarm started screaming. Emergency broadcasts flooded the communication systems. The Devourers had attacked 3 major colonies simultaneously, using new tactics that bypassed all the traditional defenses. Millions were dead or missing. The enemy was moving faster than anyone had predicted. In the sudden silence that followed, the emergency reports, Admiral Kang looked around the room at all the alien faces. Some were angry, some were scared, and some just looked defeated. "The choice is made for you now," he said quietly. "You can hate us for what we're about to do, but you'll be alive to hate us. That's better than the alternative." Several species did withdraw from the Alliance that day, choosing to face the Devourers alone rather than be associated with humanity's war crimes. But most stayed, knowing that sometimes survival required becoming the thing you feared most. The Galactic Council gave Admiral Kang complete military authority, something no single species had ever possessed. It was the devil's bargain: trade their souls for their lives, and pray that humanity would remember the difference between enemy and ally when the war was over. As the meeting ended and the aliens filed out in grim silence, General Lim approached his commander. "Sir, do you think we're doing the right thing?" Admiral Kang looked out the window at the stars, where somewhere in the darkness, an ancient evil was consuming everything in its path. "Ask me again when the war is over," he said. "If we're still alive to have the conversation." The center of the galaxy had become a nightmare. Where once a massive black hole had spun peacefully for billions of years, now something impossible was happening. The Devourer Queen, a creature the size of a small moon, was somehow eating the black hole itself. Reality bent and twisted around. her grotesque form as she consumed the very fabric of space and time. Admiral Kang Ji-won stood on the bridge of the UES Eternal, watching through reinforced windows as the laws of physics screamed in protest. The Queen looked like a giant spider made of living metal and rotting flesh, but she was so much more than that. She was the mother of all devourers, the first of her kind, ancient, beyond imagination. "Sir," reported Communications Officer Kim Dae-ho, his voice barely steady. "Long-range sensors show she's almost finished. Once she consumes the entire black hole, she'll have enough power to remake reality itself. She could turn the whole galaxy into a feeding ground for her children." Kang nodded grimly. They had known this moment would come. All their victories, all their sacrifices, had led to this final confrontation. The combined fleet of humanity and its remaining alien allies hung in space around them. Thousands of ships from dozens of worlds, all waiting for the order that would send them to their deaths. "All ships, this is Admiral Kang," he broadcast across the entire fleet. His voice was calm and clear, cutting through the static caused by the Queen's reality-warping presence. "You all know what we're here to do. There's no retreat from this one, no backup plan, no clever strategy. We ram that thing with everything we have, and we don't stop until it's dead, or we are." On the bridge of the Defiance, Captain Oh Ji-hye gripped her command chair so hard her knuckles went white. She was 35 years old, had a husband and 2 young children back on New Seoul Colony, and she was about to die for people she'd never meet. The strange thing was, she felt proud about it. "All hands prepare for ramming speed," she announced to her crew over the ship's intercom. "It's been an honor serving with you all." Around her, dozens of human vessels began to accelerate toward the Queen's massive form. The alien ships hung back, not out of cowardice, but because they had finally understood that this was something only humans could do. Only humans were crazy enough to fly directly into certain death with smiles on their faces. Lieutenant Park Jin-soo, the young pilot who had survived the first battle at Centauri Gate, was now flying a fighter escort for the ramming ships. Through his radio, he could hear the crews of the larger vessels singing old songs from Earth. Some sang military anthems, others sang lullabies their mothers had taught them, and a few sang drinking songs that made everyone laugh even as they flew toward oblivion. "This is Fighter Squadron 7, Jin-soo broadcast. We'll clear you a path through the Queen's defenses. Give them hell, big brothers." The Devourer Queen had noticed their approach. Massive tentacles, each one the size of a battleship, lashed out toward the human fleet. Her defensive systems fired weapons that could crack planets, but the human ships kept coming. When their engines were hit, they used emergency thrusters. When their weapons were destroyed, they rammed with their broken hulls. Captain Oh Ji-hye's ship was one of the first to reach the Queen. The Defiance had taken so much damage that half the crew was dead and the other half was working in sections with no air. But the ship's antimatter engines were still running, and that was all they needed. "For everyone who'll never know our names," Ji-hye whispered, echoing Admiral Kang's words as she pushed the throttle to maximum. The Defiance struck the Queen's central mass at nearly half the speed of light. The antimatter explosion was so bright it could be seen from the other side of the galaxy. But it was just the first of hundreds. Ship after ship crashed into the ancient monster, each one carrying enough explosive power to level a continent. The Queen screamed, a sound that traveled through space itself and shattered windows on planets light years away. She had never experienced pain before, had never faced an enemy willing to trade their lives so freely. Her children, the smaller devourers, had always fought with calculated precision. But these humans fought with something she couldn't understand: love for strangers. Admiral Kang watched from the Eternal as his entire fleet disappeared into balls of fire and light. Each explosion took the lives of hundreds of brave men and women, but each one also tore away pieces of the Queen's seemingly invincible form. When the last human ship had made its sacrifice, silence fell over the galactic core. The Queen's massive body was breaking apart, her stolen power bleeding back into space. The black hole she had been consuming began to reform, sucking in the remains of her corpse. "Sir," Kim Dae-ho reported, his voice filled with wonder. "She's dead. The Queen is dead. All devourer forces across the galaxy have stopped moving. I think..." I think we won. The surviving alien fleets, mostly ships that had stayed back to provide support, slowly approached the area where the battle had taken place, where once there had been thousands of human vessels. Now there was only debris and fading energy signatures. 3 months later, representatives from every species in the galaxy gathered on the neutral world of Harmony Station for a memorial service unlike any in galactic history. President Li Jun of the Human Colonial Administration stood at the podium, wearing a simple black dress instead of her usual formal robes. "We gather today not to celebrate victory," she said, her voice carrying across the vast chamber, "but to remember those who paid its price. Humanity lost 2 million brave souls in this war. They died not for glory or conquest, but because someone had to stand between the darkness and the light." In the audience, alien dignitaries sat in respectful silence. The Altarian Chancellor, who had once called humans monsters, now looked at President Li with something approaching awe. The Zephyrian delegate, its crystal form dim with grief, had finally understood what humanity's violence really meant. It was love expressed in the only language that evil could understand, but there was also fear in their eyes. The same instincts that made humans willing to die for strangers also made them capable of destroying everything they touched. The galaxy was safe now, but its protectors carried within them the seeds of its potential destruction. As president, Li accepted the galaxy's Medal of Ultimate Sacrifice, the highest honor any species could receive. The alien representatives wondered if they had traded one threat for another. Humanity had saved them all, but in doing so, they had revealed themselves as beings of terrible power and frightening loyalty. The Devourer Queen was dead, her children scattered and powerless. The galaxy could return to peace and prosperity, but it would never again forget the price of that peace or the people who had been willing to pay it. Humanity had become both the galaxy's greatest protector and its most terrifying potential enemy. The mirror's edge between hero and monster was thinner than anyone had imagined, and humans walked that edge with the casual confidence of those who had always known that survival sometimes required becoming what you feared most. The stars were safe, but they would forever remember the price of their safety.